Once the mind, or the wandering of attention and experience, comes under natural control through intuitive insight, it should be surrendered into the prior state of awareness itself. In this manner, all forms of activity cease, and all objects of attention are excluded. Abide in tranquility by such means until awareness awakens beyond the confines of the inner being. Thus, realize the true self, the radiant condition of the soul, which naturally transcends all phenomena of the body-mind and all conditions in the eternally changing realm of nature. Sri Adi Dasamraj, the enlightenment of the whole body. These Neo-Advaita teachers simply declare or fool themselves into believing that their identity or ego doesn't exist. In fact, that nothing really exists and everything is simply an illusion. Maharishi Preti, contemporary spiritual teacher. States are free, but stages are earned. Ken Wilber, Spectrum of Consciousness. The quest for spiritual enlightenment has been an enduring pursuit throughout human history. Countless seekers across various cultures and traditions have sought to transcend the limitations of the human condition and experience a profound awakening to the deeper dimensions of existence. Spiritual enlightenment is a profound and multifaceted experience that transcends the boundaries of religious doctrines and dogmas. It entails a radical shift in consciousness, an awakening to the ultimate nature of reality, and a profound recognition of one's interconnectedness with all of existence. Throughout history, numerous spiritual traditions have offered diverse paths, practices, and philosophies to facilitate this transformational journey. There are, however, real pitfalls and dangers along the path. In the past, the journey of a spiritual seeker was often arduous and filled with challenges when it came to attaining teachings. Seekers had severely limited access to spiritual teachings, which were primarily passed down through oral traditions, while written texts were extremely scarce. Seekers often had to travel great distances through extremely dangerous lands to find enlightened teachers. Obtaining and retaining sacred texts required painstaking efforts of transcription and preservation. Today's digital age has transformed the spiritual seeking landscape dramatically. The internet and the proliferation of technology have made it remarkably easy for spiritual seekers to access a vast array of teachings. A wealth of spiritual wisdom from different traditions is now just a few clicks away. This easy access to profound spiritual teachings is not without its drawbacks, misunderstandings, and confusion. Particularly in the West, the cultural setting for a real understanding of the deep profundity of the enlightened state and what it is required to realize it does not match the now easy availability of the descriptions of it. Often, too, an understanding of the relationship between spiritual stages and states is missing or not understood. This can be a major drawback. All kinds of states, including the highest and most subtle states, can be intuited, even deeply intuited, by anyone at any time. However, it is the stages of development, firstly as a grounding in human development, and then subsequently spiritual development, which allows for a perspective that determines whether one can, 1. recognize the state, and 2. stabilize and remain in that state. The 7 stages of life. There have been numerous models of human and spiritual development offered by spiritual traditions, East and West, and from the 1900s onwards, by Western psychiatric and psychological theorists. One of the very first developmental models in the West that included both Eastern and Western theoretics was Spectrum of Consciousness by Ken Wilber. The book, published in 1977, when Wilber was 23 years old, had a massive impact in spiritual and transpersonal circles. By 1985, by which time Wilber had published 4 more influential books, Wilber was being called the Einstein of consciousness. Shortly after this, however, Wilbur strongly endorsed the teachings of the American spiritual teacher, De Free John, now known as Adi Da. At the risk to his intellectual reputation, Wilbur effusively praised Adi Da's written teachings, and in particular the human and spiritual developmental model which Adi Da called the 7 stages of life. Regardless of how one might respond to the rest of Adi Da's teaching, his 7 stages of life does offer an excellent way of mapping the stages of human and spiritual development. By briefly outlining these stages, we can utilize a model in which we can, firstly, recognize spiritual states, and secondly, recognize how we can get stuck in certain states, or conversely, be pulled out of spiritual states by unfinished human or spiritual developmental stages. The 7 stages of life maps the natural unfolding of human development from birth to enlightenment. The first 3 stages typically cover the first 21 years of our lives. First stage, 0 to 7 years old. This is a time of individuation, where children separate from their mothers and develop a conscious connection with others and nature. Signs of completing this stage include individuation, socialization, cooperation, and sensitivity to nature. Second stage, 7 to 14 years old. During this stage, we develop sensitivity to the energetic dimension of existence, including our relationships with others and nature. Completing this stage involves responsible and positive interactions with others. Third stage, 14 to 21 years. This stage focuses on adapting to the psychic dimension of existence and developing our will, thinking mind, and psyche. Completion of this stage means being physically, emotionally, ethically, and mentally prepared, with enough energy and attention free from the preoccupations of money, food, or sex to begin genuine spiritual practice. The spiritual stages begin with the 4th stage and lead to enlightenment. The 4th stage is a practice of surrendering our sense of separate self to a higher power, whether we call it consciousness, source, or God. It serves as the foundation for the stages that follow, and it is important to note that the transformation occurs in the body and mind, not just the mind alone. As we deepen our surrender, we may experience emotional and psychic signs indicating the opening of our psychic dimension. This marks the 5th stage, which is associated with shamans and shamanistic practices. The length of this stage varies depending on the amount of psychic material we need to surrender. The 6th stage is when we recognize our true identity as source, consciousness, or God. After purifying ourselves through surrender, we can stably abide in this realization. The 7th stage involves overcoming the mistake of exclusively identifying ourselves with Source, consciousness, or God, while excluding the world of appearances. In this stage, both ourselves and the world are recognized as manifestations of the same divine reality. The 7th stage, known as Sahaj Samadhi, or open eyes, recognizes all seeming appearances as nothing but pure radiance, a state where everything is perceived as the radiant expression of the divine. The vast majority of people remain stuck in the first 3 stages of life for their entire lives. There is much on offer on the internet and elsewhere on how one may achieve optimum functionality in these first 3 stages of life. However, this advice is given not to free oneself for spiritual practice in the higher stages of life, but rather to achieve maximum productivity to enjoy the fruits of life. In other words, to become successful in the marketplace. What is spiritual practice? A student said to Master Ikkyu, "Please write for me something of great wisdom." Ikkyu picked up his brush and wrote one word, attention. The student said, "Is that all?" The master wrote, "Attention, attention." The student became irritable. That doesn't seem profound or subtle to me. In response, Master Akir wrote simply, attention, attention, attention. In frustration, the student demanded, "What does this word attention mean?" Akir replied, "Attention means attention. Spiritual practice is ultimately one thing, the cultivation of attention, so that attention may be turned to its source. Enlightenment is when attention realizes and rests stably its source, the one source of all appearance, one without a second. Attention is eaten in the heart, Adida. Thus, to begin spiritual practice is to begin to free our energy and attention. This begins not in some profound, subtle or casual spiritual realms, but in the living of a simple functional life. We begin our spiritual practice in the gross realm of the day-to-day living of life. We begin by freeing our energy and attention by living the discipline of simple functionality in the areas of money, or more generally, our energetic exchanges with others and the world, food, or more generally, our energetic relationship with our bodies, sex, or more generally, our emotional relationships, sexual or otherwise, with others. How do we navigate these areas and achieve simple functionality and thus free energy and attention for spiritual practice? Firstly, we are guided by simplicity and functionality, or a minimal optimum. What is the minimum amount of energy and attention that I can give to these areas of life and still maintain an optimum result? Most importantly, we live this discipline of the minimum optimum not through any exercise of the will, but by returning to the core of our spiritual practice, turning attention to its source. Not only in periods of meditation, but also in amongst the activities and responsibilities of daily life. Most people never go beyond the first 3 stages of life. Most people remain stuck and complicated in the areas of money, food, and sex for their entire lives. Those few who do achieve functionality in these areas, that have no prior intention to practice spiritually, tend to use the liberated energy and attention to increase productivity and thus gain the goods of life. Those who have liberated energy and attention in these areas and have used that freed energy and attention to achieve goals of productivity are those who in today's world we tend to call successful. For anyone trying to achieve a high degree of functionality in these areas of life, they can often experience extreme degrees of painful uncomfortableness, frustration, confusion, anxiety, and even depression, what is called in the Hindu spiritual tradition tapas, or heat. This turning of attention that is the core of spiritual practice can, and usually does, create tapas, particularly in this gross realm of practice. This is where the first real danger occurs, a danger and a mistake that precludes many people from developing an authentic spiritual practice. Tapas can be endured, allowing its purifying function, i.e. purifying attention, or it can be escaped, resulting in a pause, sometimes lifelong, of the purifying function. The balancing act required by authentic spiritual practice is to consistently turn attention to its source, while allowing tapas to develop us into the higher stages of life. Or because anyone, at any time, can intuit, even quite deeply intuit, the higher states, including the states of the 6th and even the 7th stages of life. We can attempt to remain in the intuited states of either the 6th or 7th stage of life while bypassing the necessary tapas of the first 3 stages of life. This is not a moral judgment, but merely an indication of the development of one's free energy and attention. The problem and danger of the second option, trying to remain in a higher state while avoiding the tapas of the completion of the first 3 stages of life, is that we are not able to remain stably in those higher states. Our attention has not been finally and utterly freed from the realms of money, food, and sex, through a discipline of simplicity, functionality, and the minimum optimum. Thus, our attention is drawn out of any of the higher states repeatedly. This is the first form of spiritual bypassing, and for some it can be a hellish state. We cannot stably remain in that higher state. We bounce between intuitions of the higher states and complications and even addictions in the realms of money, food, and sex. Again and again and again, possibly for lifetimes. Without this maturation and completion of the first 3 stages of life, we cannot authentically begin spiritual practice. Without completing the first 3 stages of life, we cannot move beyond the gross stages and begin the first subtle or spiritual stage of practice, the 4th stage of life. In the 4th stage of life, we go from the gross stages of spiritual practice to subtle stages of spiritual practice, while the successful completion of the first 3 stages of life frees primarily mind-based forms of attention in the gross realms of money, food, and sex. The 4th stage frees body-based subtle forms of energy and attention. Our attention in the gross realms of the first 3 stages of life is bound by repetitive thoughts. Addiction or complication in the realms of money, food, and sex is always initiated by rumination or repetitive thoughts. In the 4th stage of life, we begin the process of freeing energy and attention in its subtle bodily forms. We do this through bodily surrender and devotion. We surrender bodily. Now, having realized a simple and functional relationship with money, food, and sex, we experience a profound shift in our orientation towards the world. The concerns and preoccupations of the earlier stages, such as personal achievement, relationships, and material success, become less significant as the individual recognizes their transitory and ultimately unsatisfying nature. The individual recognizes that spiritual realization is not separate from everyday existence, but rather permeates and transforms every aspect of it. There is a profound understanding that all of life is an opportunity for growth, learning, and the expression of love and compassion. The 4th stage is not a stage of complete ego transcendence. However, the ego, or sense of separate self, of the 4th stage is an ego of attention purified of gross realms of money, food, and sex. The ego of the 4th stage of life is now limited only by subtle energy and attention held in the body. Source, or God, is still experienced as God apart, as Source or God separate from us. This sense of bodily separation from Source or God produces a profound, almost desperate yearning for unity with Source or God. All notions of realizing a lasting satisfaction in the realms of money, food, and sex are long gone. Our only possible satisfaction now is Source or God. These intense bodily yearning to merge with Source or God produces the tapas, the spiritual heat of the 4th stage. This intense yearning takes the form of surrender and devotion, which is the purification and freeing of subtle bodily energy and attention. The 4th stage is the domain of the great saints, east or west, those purified of attention in the gross realms, but not yet purified of bodily attention, thus yearning for God. The devotion of the 4th stage is not limited to mere belief or emotional sentimentality. It is a powerful force that arises from the depth of one's being and encompasses the totality of one's life. Devotion in the 4th stage of life is characterized by a profound longing to merge with Source or God, a yearning for the direct realization of ultimate truth. True devotion is a radical self-surrender and a willingness to offer oneself completely to the Source or God. Ultimately, however, it is a further stage in the freeing of energy and attention. Devotion and surrender free the energy and attention held subtly in the body, which expresses itself prior to thought as the thoughtless feeling, I am the body. The surrender and devotion of the fourth stage of life also opens up to profound levels of intuition. Intuition plays a vital role in the fourth stage of life. The awakening capacity for developing and trusting one's intuitive faculty allows for accessing higher knowledge and understanding. Intuition in this context refers to a direct, non-conceptual knowing that transcends ordinary intellectual reasoning and arises from a deeper level of consciousness. In the fourth stage of life, there is a recognition that true understanding goes beyond the limitations of the mind and intellect. Intuition becomes a valuable tool for navigating the complexities of the spiritual journey and discerning what is truly in alignment with one's highest purpose and realization. In the fourth stage of life, intuition becomes a guiding force, leading the individual towards greater clarity, wisdom, and self-transcendence. Thus, the saint, in their deep yearning, often hears the voice of God. As attention is released from the body through devotion and surrender, for some, not all, attention can be discovered to be held in psychic realms. For those whose energy and attention are held in psychic realms, the fifth stage of life becomes necessary. Saints, while yearning for God, may not only experience profound intuition, the voice of God, but also visions of all kinds. Various experiences of psychic phenomena and abilities are possible in the fifth stage of life. These psychic abilities can include clairvoyance, telepathy, precognition, and other forms of extrasensory perception. However, it is important not to become attached to or overly fascinated with these psychic experiences, as they can be distractions from the deeper realization of one's true nature as consciousness itself. In fact, psychic phenomena are not inherently indicative of spiritual advancement or realization, as they can be egoic in nature and subject to the limitations of the relative world. For many, the fifth stage of life and its psychic content can be only a minor stage, or not necessary at all. While there is the potential to experience all kinds of psychic abilities in the fifth stage of life, it is important to remain focused on the deeper aspects of spiritual realization, the source of attention. Therefore, it is important not to let attention become caught up in psychic abilities or visions, but rather to continue the freeing of energy and attention for real spiritual practice and the direct recognition of consciousness as the source of all experience. The second form of spiritual bypassing. As we have seen, the first form of spiritual bypassing is when, rather than endure the tapas, heat of the first three stages of life, expressed in the realms of money, food, and sex, we seek to escape that tapas by retreating into an intuition of higher states such as the sixth, identification with consciousness, and even the seventh stage, the recognition of self and world as temporary modifications of consciousness. Remember, this is possible because we can intuit any state at any time, regardless of our human or spiritual development. The second form of spiritual bypassing occurs when we may have completed the first three stages of life. That is, we have realized a simple functionality or a minimum optimum in the realms of money, food, and sex that have bypassed the purification of bodily attention of the fourth stage of life via bodily surrender and devotion. The last 30 years have seen the rise of Neo-Advaita teachings in the West. These teachings tend to suggest that any developmental practice or movement through the stages of life is not necessary. All that is necessary is a deep intuition of the higher states. That intuition is said to be simple and obvious, which is true. All one needs to do is keep quiet and make no effort, or inquire, "Who am I?" Both of these practices, from a state's point of view, will most definitely bring one fairly quickly into an often deep, but ultimately temporary intuition of higher states. From a stage's point of view, the capacity to keep quiet profoundly, deeply, and stably requires as a minimum the freeing of attention from the first 3 stages of life, while from a stages point of view, the capacity to make no effort requires the tapas of bodily surrender and devotion and the releasing of attention from the thoughtless feeling, I am the body, which coincidentally frees one from the notion that one is the doer. The inquiry, who am I, is in some form the core of all spiritual practice, i.e., the turning of attention to its source. However, that inquiry, or turning, will only ever be superficial and temporary unless energy and attention is liberated in the first 3 stages and 4th stages of life. So, why then did these great spiritual masters teach these practices? We must take into account the context in which they were taught. These practices were taught by Indian teachers to, in the vast majority, Indian students in India. In the context of Indian society and culture, these teachers could rightly assume that their students had some maturity and simple functioning in the first 3 stages of life, and for the most part, a lifelong engagement with devotional practices. As these teachings spread to the West, it became increasingly obvious that these stages cannot be assumed there. In fact, the West remains as a culture and society dysfunctional, addictive, and adolescent in the development of the first 3 stages of life. As for an understanding of purpose and necessity of a devotional practice, it remains virtually non-existent in the West. This has resulted in a mistaken effort by Western receivers of these Neo-Advaita teachings to attempt to remain in the intuited higher states without completing or even starting the developmental work of the first 4 stages of life. Those who have not at least achieved some sort of simple functionality in the first 3 stages of life often have their attention attracted by the possibilities of money, food, and sex. Sometimes they live secret lives where they can indulge in these possibilities, which can become very problematic if they have established themselves as teachers with power and influence over others. Those Westerners who have achieved a simple functionality in the first stages of their life, via a formal life discipline, but have bypassed the necessary stage of bodily devotion and surrender, find it easy to remain in an intuited higher state. However, without the purification through devotional practice of the I am the body idea, they tend to remain in those states in a dry, unemotional, unfeeling, unaffected, and almost dead-to-life manner. They often seem utterly removed from and totally unaffected by life. The thoughtless feeling, I am the body, unconsciously remains. And even though the feeling, I am the body, is unconscious, they strongly avoid that unconscious feeling by attempting to remain unaffected in the intuited higher stage, rather than purify it through devotional surrender. The enlightenment of the whole body. It is clear that the enlightenment of the whole body requires both states and stages. Even in a Western context, if someone claims realization of a higher state and is revealed to have some complications or addictions in the first 3 stages of life, such as addiction to sex, drugs, or even money, their realization would come into question. Even in the most practice-denying Neo-Advaita circles, the food is often healthy, alcohol is absent, and orgies tend to be very rare. What is almost completely ignored or misunderstood in the West is the necessity for the bodily devotional surrender. However, there seems to be a shift happening. After years and years of the non-practice of Neo-Advaita, very few, if any, have managed to remain stably within the higher states, even though they intuited them with such force when first introduced to them. Many of these people became teachers of the Neo-Advaita message, but within a few years faded from view as they themselves began to question the veracity of their realization. They now have begun to turn to other teachers and other methods for help. One of those teachers is Maharishi Preti, whose teachings have only in recent years become available. Maharishi Preti strongly suggests particularly those Neo-Advaitans escaping to intuited higher states, not to bypass the necessity of body surrender and devotion. She suggests returning to a solid sense of body identification and beginning a practice of surrender of the body from there. Although she does not teach the schema of 7 stages of life, as communicated here, it is obvious where her teaching fits is a 4th stage teaching, which at this particular time in spiritual history is both welcomed and necessary. Once we have completed the gross stages of the first 3 stages of life and the subtle stages of the 4th and 5th stages, only then do we have the capacity to remain stably in the casual stages and states of the 6th and 7th. Only then is it possible for attention to be eaten in the heart. As mentioned and utilized throughout this video, the teachings of Sri Adida Samraj remain some of the most detailed and comprehensive ever communicated. As Ken Wilber said, "My opinion is that we have, in the person of Adida, a spiritual master and religious genius of the ultimate degree. I assure you I do not mean that lightly. I'm not tossing out high-powered phrases to hype the works of Adida. I'm simply offering to you my own considered opinion. Adida's teaching is, I believe, unsurpassed by that of any other spiritual hero, of any period, of any place, of any time, of any persuasion." Strong words, controversial words, words that only you decide the truth of. True enlightenment is not just an intellectual or emotional understanding. It involves the awakening and realization of the whole body-mind, a direct and experiential recognition of the fundamental nature of reality. It is the dissolution of the separate self and the embodiment of profound unity, love, and freedom. Sri Adida Samraj.